9 years later, almost a decade, and it's still not a mass market thing. How close are you guys getting?
Well, Greg, we're actually getting very close now. We have come through a year of crash testing. You have to do that for all the regulators in Washington, D.C.
Right.
And now we're ready to open the export market. We'll be shipping out a completely knocked down truck that our customers can put together in a foreign country and distribute in their market. It's good for them. It's good for us. It gives us practice making trucks, which is what every company needs. It gives them a much price reduced vehicle that doesn't use any fuel, so they can sell it into their markets. A couple of the markets that we're entertaining right now, they're still spending $6.40 a gallon for gas.
Wow.
Plus, our trucks have integral solar recharging. So if you don't have a power supply to plug the vehicle into, which you can use an ordinary wall socket, or the high-powered sidewalk chargers that you see around town now, or just leave it in the sunshine and it'll charge itself up.
Wow, that's pretty awesome. That multifaceted approach is definitely one that's been kind of lacking from the electric car community. But I guess I'm kind of curious, would you say that technology or bureaucracy has been a bigger obstacle for you in this realm?
Well, there's no competition there whatsoever. We've been in business now for 9 years. We have overcome one technological hurdle after another: weight, wind resistance, bearings, controllers, batteries. We've worked through all of that. And during that 8 years, the bureaucracy of the EPA and the Department of Transportation that we have to work through has grown 10 times in size.
Man. Yeah, that's such a bummer because this, of course, would be great for people, but it seems like, I mean, would you say that the auto industry lobby is behind a lot of that?
I absolutely would. The thing I've become convinced of is that the Environmental Protectionist Agency works for the oil companies and the Department of Transportation works for the major car makers. Their job is to keep competition out of the market, which they do very effectively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. I feel like we see the same thing with the FDA. You know, every drug that has had to be recalled because a lot of people have been sick or killed or injured, I mean, it was first approved by the FDA. And so that's not a stamp of approval all the time that I think is really that valuable.
Well, that being said, a lot of the drugs that some people would probably be injured by would help other people, and they take 10, 15 years to come to market. In the meantime, thousands and thousands of people die that could be helped by that drug just because of the bureaucracy.
Right. That is another great point. So as far as your company goes, why aren't you guys getting the same attention as, say, Tesla Motors?
Well, the difference is Tesla was founded by some of my acquaintances in the business, smart guys. They did a good job converting the Ford or the Lotus over to electric. And they had an idea to use computer batteries to power their vehicles, which is now vastly outdated technology, but they still use it. What happened when Elon Musk did his hostile takeover of the company and fired all the original founders is he asserted his ability not to sell cars, but to sell stock. And he's done really, really well at that. Tesla is still a very, very small car company. We will pass Tesla up in our second year in business as far as sales of individual vehicles, because our vehicle costs about a third of what his costs, and we're a pickup truck, not a sports car.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm definitely skeptical any time that the mainstream media gives anyone this much attention because, of course, we know that they're bought and sold. So I kind of feel like, you know, they're putting up a false god in front of us, so to speak, in terms of the electric car community. But then you got, you know, you guys are doing some work and it's a little more under the radar, at least as far as the corporate media is concerned. And I definitely think those are the places you got to look. Wherever they're not putting their spotlight is probably where, you want to put yours.
Well, the difference is that we sell trucks and they sell stock.
Right.
They need to have a high profile. They need to have press releases every day. They need to have great stories out there. And I will give it to Elon. They tried to destroy him for sure. We thought he was done 2 years ago when the short traders had about 40 million of his shares out there, and they were just destroying the company day by day. Elon had put probably a little better than $40 million of his own money in the company, which I laud him for. That was really a great move on his part.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is that the short traders ended up getting caught because what they tried to do was make the stock continue down until the company delisted. And they took a reporter from Time magazine who drove the car, abused it for 5 days, and then it finally died on him on the turnpike. And he wrote an excoriating article in Time magazine about his personal experience with the Tesla S. So Elon's technicians flew out there, got the black box out of the car, downloaded the actual driving history of the car, discovered that this newspaper guy or this magazine guy from Time magazine had completely abused the car, drove it at 100 miles an hour, drove it with the heat on, with the windows down, didn't charge it for 3 days at a time. And still, the car exceeded its design criteria.
Wow.
So Elon has a great PR network. So he released his version of what happened, and the stock did about a 9% jump. It jumped about $2. It was just enough to catch the naked short traders without stock. They had to get that stock and deliver that stock before the end of business, or they lose the ability to trade at the exchange. Mm-hmm. Well, the stock went from about $22.50 to $180 in less than a month. And it cost one bank that was doing it was Citigroup. They lost close to $1.8 billion on Tesla stock.
Wow.
And it couldn't happen to a nicer bunch of guys. In the meantime, Elon sold treasury stock into the market, allowed himself to bulk the company up in cash. He paid his Department of Energy loans, which they were killing him on. They were slow with disbursements, killing his cash flow. He was in running danger of not being able to make payroll. He paid the DOE loans off 9 years early, gave them the high sign, and said, I am never coming back. So he saved his company, and he saved himself by that move, but he was extremely lucky. The other 11 car companies that went public that tried to build electric vehicles all went broke the same way. Well, we didn't go public. We stayed private. So we weathered all of that, and we survived.
Nice. So that point you make about him selling stock is pretty telling. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I guess maybe an example of that would be asking you your thoughts on this Tesla home battery. I mean, is that a real game-changing advancement, or is that kind of a baby step with savvy marketing behind it?
I don't think it's going to be a big seller. I just don't think people in this country experience blackouts that much. Now, in a third world country where you have power, between 6 o'clock and 9 o'clock at night, and the rest of the time you have no electricity, it might come in very handy because you might have to run something at noon and you don't have electricity. But Americans don't really think that way, not with respect to their homes. I have been trying for years to get people to look at building homes with 2 grids in them. One that you connect to the meter and you pay the power company and you get your home permit and all that by having that. And a second grid, which is low voltage, which runs LED lighting and a certain number of plugs in the house so that you can run different things like a vacuum cleaner or a stereo or a TV or something like that. And that way you could lower your burden on your meter. You would actually make more money by reducing your demand on your meter than you would selling the energy back to the grid.
Smart, man. That sounds like a wise idea.
Because you're paying 11 cents a mil for the electricity at your meter, and they're paying you 6 cents a mil for what you bank with them. So why not just supply your own 11 cents per mil electricity and not use theirs?
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing I've been hearing about in the energy world, is plasma engines. And I think maybe this is more for space, but as I understand it, they can get power and thrust out of just electricity without any fuel. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true. Now, it's not very much thrust. The Canna motor, which was really a phenomenal application using microwaves to create particles, which are then accelerated out the back end with no intake port. That is to say, there's no fuel on board. It's just electricity. They made 50 micronewtons of thrust, which it should not have made. I mean, it's just theoretically, it can't work, but it did. Now, 50 micronewtons is not much, thrust, but you're only talking a disc maybe 18 inches across. If you do the calculations and get that to, say, 30 feet across, and you put it into space where you don't have the interference of air in this plasma generation, then you could probably generate several hundred pounds of thrust. Not a whole lot, but 180 pounds of thrust over, say, 3 30-foot diameter plasma motors would continuously accelerate that craft. As long as you had light hitting those panels, that craft would be accelerating. And given a couple months, you could probably get up to a quarter or maybe even a third light speed, which is significant.
Yeah. Wow, man, that's pretty fascinating. And, I've had a lot of guests who have kind of made me feel as if there's a secret physics involving electricity, or often maybe even high-speed rotation. And it seems like there's something there, a little pocket of physics that the establishment purposely wants to cover up. And, I mean, it's all over my head, but this is kind of what some of the guests have made me feel like. Do you have any thoughts on that? Does that seem to be true to you?
It is, and it's not really necessary. If you take the time to travel around and visit the facilities, like go to the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatories. There are 2 of them in this country. There's one in Louisiana in Livingston, and there's one in Hanford, Washington. I've been to both facilities. These are the world's biggest Michelson-Morley interferometers. What they do is they're attempting to measure changes in the fabric of space-time. It hasn't really been successful yet, although they've been online for probably 15, 18 years now. They're not online all the time because it takes a lot to get them online. You have to evacuate tunnels that are 4 kilometers long. That's a lot of space to evacuate the air out of it. Then you shoot a laser down each one of these like a giant framing square. They bounce off of sapphire-coated mirrors back and forth until this laser beam is like 20,000 miles long. Then they change the phase of one of those legs 90 degrees and overlay the 2 laser beams so they cancel each other out. Now, if you have really good control over your frequency of your laser, and you have a really flat mirror, and all conditions are perfect, you get a black spot. If there's any vibration, it won't work. So they hang these mirrors from 2,000-pound weights, which are suspended by like piano wire. So Earth's vibration, a truck driving by or waves crashing on the beach or something, cannot affect that mirror because of the inertia in that weight that's hanging from that piano wire. So what this gives us is a perfect view of space-time 20,000 miles long down each one of these legs of the interferometer. If space-time curves, which theoretically should happen if a gravitational wave comes through, like from coalescing neutron stars or a rotating black hole or something like that, then the fabric of space-time is going to ripple. And when it ripples, the length of that laser beam going along that fabric is going to change. That's what they're trying to measure. Now, in building this thing, they got to measure all kinds of things that they didn't expect to see. One of those things that they did not expect to see, that Dr. Fred Robb, who's the engineer, PhD engineer that runs the facility in Hanford, Washington, told me. One of the things they're seeing is particles like photons popping into our dimension from another dimension. And that's a quote. So we already know that information in the form of photons and protons and electrons is moving in between our dimension and another dimension, or let's call it our universe and another universe. Right. So being able to harness that and make it work in our dimension is the challenge. And a lot of people have tried it. Only the Cana motor has been successful in doing it, as far as I know.
Wow. Man, that's a pretty good explanation. I mean, that makes sense to even me, which is saying something.
Well, there was a researcher whose name was Casimir. And he said that if you make two metal plates extremely flat, like flat within millionths of an inch, and you put those plates close enough together, they're not quite touching, and then put them in a vacuum, just the presence of the plates will induce particles to come into that space between those plates, and it will create some energy flow. It'll be small, 1 electron volt or a fraction of an electron volt. Mm-hmm. And it's repeatable, and people are doing it. Is it useful? Not really. It's 0-point energy. You'd have to have an antenna, the size of New Mexico to power a car. Mm-hmm. So it's not really practical. But the Cana motor takes the inertia of the craft and overcomes it by shoving protons out the back of this motor that it induces into our dimension using microwaves.
Jesus, man. There's just so much happening on the scientific and technological edge right now. It's kind of hard to keep it all straight. Before we switch gears a little bit, is there anything else in the energy area that really has you excited right now?
Well, I will say that in the area of energy storage, of course, we build electric vehicles, so we rely a lot on batteries. Yeah. Batteries and capacitors have been played with, by everybody that's got a garage or has the money to buy a bunch of batteries and capacitors. Mm-hmm. The issue is that capacitors accept electricity recharge totally differently than batteries do. As you recharge a capacitor, it changes voltage until you finally got all the electrons stacked on the dielectric that'll go there, and then you create a path for them to escape one side to the other. Mm-hmm. That's how capacitors work. And as soon as they do, of course, the voltage drops off. Batteries will maintain a constant voltage for a long time until it begins to run low on electrons with enough current flow. Then the voltage will drop off. So that's what we want in a vehicle. We want to maintain constant voltage for 100 miles, and then we want it to drop off. Mm-hmm. But we also want to recharge quickly and infinitely, like capacitors.
Yeah.
So I think the frontier for us, and it's going very slowly, way too slow for me, is to hybridize capacitors and batteries into one unit. Something that will maintain a constant voltage, but will accept instantaneous charge like a capacitor an infinite number of times.
Totally, man. Best of both worlds. So is there anyone out there who's really doing that right now?
Well, lots of people are trying. There are some new compounds. Graphene is something that's been played with for, I don't know, maybe 50 years. But making a graphene film has only been successfully done in the last 2 years. And it was done on the university level, which is sometimes terrible for industry because a lot of the processes are accidental. They're not very well reported. The technology is not very well protected, or it's overprotected. And it's not really industrial in scale. The first ones that they made on a CD disc using the laser for the CD disc to cure the graphene film. Of course, you have to, listen to the whole 700 megabytes to get it to cure, which is very, very slow. But at least it worked. And then it's very thin. It's only 1 or 2 molecules thick. That's not really useful. We need something that's much thicker, that can take a lot more charge. And so the processes just have not been scaled up yet. And believe me, Greg, nothing would please me more than to have $1 million in a lab over here and start scaling that technology up. But it just isn't out there.
Yeah.
We are at a terrible place, a worst place I've seen in my lifetime, or that I've even read about, as far as really developing new technology in the United States. It's awful.
Really? That surprises me a little bit because tech seems to be moving pretty crazy in today's world, but I guess the conspiracy guy in me would say that makes sense, and that because the establishment has such a vested interest in keeping the monopolies the way they are, they do everything they can. Bureaucracy, red tape, passing lobbyist-sponsored interference, economic interference as well, all to get the genie back in the bottle and slow down progress. Do you think that might be why these are really tough times for tech?
Well, that may in fact be the reason. What we see is, according to the president of Gallup, who does a lot of very well-respected polling in a lot of different areas, the United States is at the lowest level of business startups that we've been in 40 years. Now, that's just not because we have a shortage of entrepreneurs or because we don't have smart people that want to do stuff. It's simply because all of the capital has been borrowed out of the market by the federal government. There's no money left. We are at a complete liquidity vacuum in the United States. It is harder today for a company to write a check for, say, $5 million than it's ever been, ever, even since the Civil War, harder.
Wow.
There are fewer individual investors that can write a check for $5 million today than you can imagine. I'd say less than 500 nationwide. They're rich, they have money, but they can't write a check. They have to go sell some stock or sell some property or sell some gold or something, but there's no liquidity in the market. And this is a very, very dangerous place for a country to be. We are so vulnerable right now. I cannot explain that in extreme enough terms.
Yeah, that's really sad because the internet, the way it is, of course, it frees up so many possibilities for new businesses. But I guess, of course, the economy is manipulated as well. How do you see that progressing?
That's a really good question. I think on a small scale, companies that need $10,000 or $30,000, there are lots of alternatives for them. There's crowdfunding, there's, friends and family, there's things that you can do. But for a company that needs, 5 million or 10 million or 100 million to get started and launch, put something serious into production, that kind of money doesn't exist in the United States anymore. We ourselves had to go to one of the Balkan states, one of the new states from 1991, in order to find the money to launch our company. And it was there in large amounts, and we accessed it, and that's how we got started. And, we have a lot of competition. Well, we had a lot of competition about 5 years ago. Now we're so far ahead of them, they've just given up. And it's simply because we were able to access funds outside the country. Now we're getting ready to go to the next level. We're still not going public, but we're getting ready to go to the next level by accessing some institutional investors. And that makes it a lot more successful for us. We can reach higher and we can run faster. But it took 8 years to get here. Most companies don't have the legs to go 8 years.
Yeah. Man, that is troubling for sure. And these are uncertain economic times, but let's switch gears a little bit. I mean, now that we're properly lubed up, let's get into the Hollow Earth a bit. I mean, I know you're familiar with the lore and the legends and the ancient descriptions, and that's all really interesting. But what was it that got you to take it seriously?
Oh, I like the science. The thing that interests me about it is we have a lot of information from people who really shouldn't have any business having that information or generating that information. Like you say, there's a lot of stories, there's a lot of lore, there's a religious foundations from South America, from Egypt, from Asia, from Russia. It's phenomenal how many people, how many cultures on this planet have a deep tradition that they are somehow connected with the inside of the earth. Mm-hmm. And the fascinating thing for me, when someone handed me a book, and I believe it was 2002 or 2003, we were writing the first volume of the Arc of Millions of Years. It was published in 2004, so we were definitely writing then. And it was about the Hollow Earth, and I read it, and I thought, wow, that's amusing, but there's no way it could be real. I put it on the shelf and forgot about it. But after the book came out in 2004, it was a pretty good success. We were able to travel and go take some of the photographs for ourselves instead of using other people's photographs and paying license fees. And we got out in some places and discovered that there were 3 areas where we were steadily getting hard data. One of those was geology, geophysics. We were getting seismological data from the USGS almost on an hourly basis around the world. And some of this was pretty significant. The earthquakes were sizable. And when you have a big earthquake, it's sort of like doing a CAT scan of the earth. The vibration thumps on one side, it goes through the planet, and it's picked up by listening stations on the other side of the planet. Well, the delay in those vibrations and the direction of those vibrations can generate a sort of picture of the inside of the planet. Like when you're doing seismology in the oil fields, you blow up a charge of dynamite. Those vibrations go down to the earth, bounce off the strata, come back up to geophones, which are stretched out for a mile or so above the ground, and you get an image of what's underneath you. Unfortunately, the USGS did not have the funding or even a program to coordinate all that information. But eventually, when Washington University, under Dr. Y. Sessions, got a grant put together, the grad students got their hands on 600,000 of these seismograms from the USGS, they analyzed them. And they created a real picture of what the inside of the planet looked like. And what they discovered, and they published, is that there was another ocean on the inside of the crust as large as the Atlantic Ocean. And I said to myself, hold on a minute. I thought we lived on a molten ball in space.
Right.
I thought we lived very precariously on tectonic plates, and we floated around on a big pool of molten lava like cornflakes in a bowl of milk. That's not the way the planet's made. So I started investigating it again. And this time I found a lot more evidence. It didn't necessarily prove the Earth was hollow, but it definitely proved it wasn't made the way I was taught in school. So the other thing that we noticed about these sciences is they don't talk to each other. Geologists don't talk to cosmologists. They don't talk to oceanographers. Well, I started stitching the pieces together from one science to the other. Once we jumped out into the cosmology and we started looking at imagery of Earth from space, we started to learn much more about the auroras over both poles and how they act and what causes them when they show up, and plotted that information against things like the solar wind, solar flares, magnetic filaments, this kinds of stuff. And we found that we did not have a very good fit. In mathematics, we call this the R squared. It means how well does the data fit a line that's drawn through it? Is there a lot of error, or is it like 99.99% right on the line? Mm-hmm. It was terrible. It was useless data that was sometimes manipulated. That is to say, outliers were dropped purposefully out of the data to create a better fit. Once you put all the data back in, there's no fit at all. So if that's not what is causing the auroras, there has to be another cause.
Yeah.
There has to be something that lines up with this flow of high energy particles that strike our atmosphere and cause them to luminesce. And it turns out it's the electrojet from inside the planet.
Wow.
In order for that to be, it would mean that there would have to be a significant thinning of the metal crust at the poles. This is something that's in the lore, it's in the religions, it's in the history, but it's not in the science.
Right.
And that's why we went looking for information, satellite imagery, maybe some measurements taken off the ocean floor. Greg, there was nothing. Nothing. No photos, no measurements. These areas had never been sailed before by sea. In Antarctica, they're covered with ice, thousands and thousands and thousands of feet thick. In the Arctic, it is so rough and so dangerous, no one has ever done it by sea.
Damn.
So that's why we decided we're going to go up there and we're going to get some samples off the sea floor. Now it's 4,400 meters deep. That's pretty deep ocean, about 14,000 feet. It's hard to take a cable 14,000 feet long on a boat and pay it out, take a sample, and then reel it back in, especially with ice all around.
Yeah.
It's just a very, very difficult project to do. And we tried to raise the money. It took about $3 million to get the icebreaker just to get there and back. But then get Washington University, Stanford, Harvard, MIT. We had a group from Cambridge that was interested in coming. We put together 100 of the world's best multidisciplinary scientific team to go up there and take these measurements. And we could not raise the money. Of course, we started in 2007, and in 2008, we had the crappiest economy that you can imagine.
True.
And it just never recovered. We just couldn't raise the money to make this project happen. So earlier this year, in February, we did the first documentary about all these voyages that I've done, all these strange pictures that I've taken and evidence that we've collected for the History Channel. Now, it hasn't aired yet. I think it's going to air next month. But it was so good that we're getting ready to do a small mini-series, like 3 days of airings, because there's too much data to look at in one program. And this is really the first television documentary that's ever been done on Hollow Earth.
Right.
It should be really significant, and maybe we can get enough interest that we can get this money together to rent this ship while it's still floating. I think it's going to be decommissioned in 2 years, and we can make this voyage.
Man, that is so interesting. I remember hearing you on Coast to Coast talking about it several years ago, probably around 2007, maybe around up to 2009. But
yep.
I was so excited and interested because I'm just like, here's the guy who actually is like, look, it's not like we're talking about going to Mars. It's up there. I mean, I know it's not the most pleasant environment, but
they are talking about going to Mars, but they're not talking about going to the Arctic to see if we live on a hollow planet.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. So did you face any real resistance on trying to do this outside of the financial obstacles?
No, not really. I mean, we did from the esoteric community. All the scientists were ready to go, but of course, scientists pick crumbs with the sparrows. We have no money. It takes grants, and you have to access pretty large foundations to be able to get those kind of grants. We formed a nonprofit. It wasn't it wasn't at all financially successful for us. So either we were really dumb at running it, or we just there just wasn't the money for this kind of project. But the opposition that we did get was actually inside the Hollow Earth community from other so-called Hollow Earth experts.
That's interesting.
They wouldn't actually make the threats, but what they would say is, if you go up there, you're going to be blown out of the water. You're now on a list of people that are being investigated by some secret government agency, and that's just not true. We go to Washington all the time. Nobody's investigating us, I can tell you that. They might think we're a little bit spooky, a bunch of crackpots want to go up there in the roughest, most violent seas on the planet with icebergs the size of houses, and I guess we are. But, the data needs to be collected. We need to stop guessing.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a little curious if when push comes to shove, if you wouldn't be stopped by some military envoy or something, but
there's no military envoy above the 85th parallel, I'll tell you that, unless it's under the sea, and they're not going to come up close to the surface. I guarantee you they'll stay 500 feet under the waves. You don't want to risk a $250 million submarine getting hit in the top by an iceberg.
Fair. So I did hear one interesting little saga. Didn't you have something going on with a missing production company that you were working with along the way?
That was pretty strange. We were contacted by a Park Avenue production company. To get on Park Avenue and be a production company, you usually have to have some credibility. It's not just an address that's going to get you that fame. You got to get the fame first. So they contacted us and really thought that they could put the money together to make this happen. Of course, they wanted the exclusive rights to film, which I didn't have a problem with, because this is kind of a cross between Survivor and the Kardashians, in the sense that you have 100 scientists from all over the world speaking different languages. Some of them probably get seasick, and you're putting them on the same ship 500 miles from rescue in 24-hour-a-day light, and you're stressing at them as hard as they've ever been stressed for 15 days straight at sea. And to have cameras running 24 hours a day, filming not only the interpersonal relations, but also the challenges at gathering the data with film, with water samples, sea life samples. There would be discoveries made every 20 minutes on this voyage, because these waters have never been tested. These seas have never been seen by human eyes before. And we were going to see things that we'd never seen before. Now, we might just see whales and ice, but there might be other things as well. And we were prepared to record all of that. And they were excited about that. And we were too. So they had their board meeting. They decided to fund us. And then the communication went dark. Nothing. No emails returned. No phone calls returned. So I thought, well, maybe it just wasn't that exciting to them. Maybe they really saw how much it was going to cost and they backed off. So just for giggles, I went to my Facebook, and because I have a few thousand people on there, and I said, listen, does anybody live in New York? Can you go by this address at Park Avenue and see if there really is a company there, or was I just hoodwinked? And about an hour later, well, maybe it was 2 hours later, I get this note back. Went by there. The company is there, and the lights are on inside, but there's nobody there. Coffee cups on desk, laptops sitting open. It's just like everybody left, just gone like that. And I thought, well, that's really strange. And they went back, I think one other time about a week later, and it was the same way. It was like everybody in that place was evacuated and never came back. Who leaves their laptop open on their desk? I mean, you take your laptop home, or you close it down or turn it off or something. People just left. So I thought that was very, very strange.
That's definitely odd. But man, that would have been a reality show I would have loved to watch. All the drama and the education in one package, that would have been sweet. Now, like we said, you've been at this thing for almost a decade, and times have changed since then. Kickstarter and GoFundMe, they weren't really around, and of course, it's tough to raise $3 million. But how about we try to get just enough to go up and do a preliminary flyover, just so we can get a film of the entrance if it's there, or even a drone flight over, perhaps?
We have discussed that. There's not enough range for a flying drone to do this unless it's solar powered. Mm. And the sun is so low up there, even in the summertime, you're not going to get much energy from it. There would be a way to do it with LTAs, with lighter than air. If we could, and we're working on a design, develop a helium balloon that would go up to a certain altitude and stay there. It wouldn't just keep going on up to 100,000 feet, because once you get above about 7,000 feet, you're not going to see anything. It's going to be completely whited out with clouds.
Okay.
So we need something, and we probably need like a dozen of them. We would launch them in prevailing easterly winds. So they'd be blowing from west to east. Of course, they can't communicate. They can only record. So you launch them, and then you have another crew, or you go back to the port and fly over to the other side and wait for the balloons to come across. And as they come across, then you shoot them down and retrieve them. And that can be done a variety of different ways, and it could be done affordably, and then download the information from the cameras and see what you see. And we were actually talking, that's one of the 3-day series we're talking about with History Channel right now, is doing these LTAs. Each one would probably cost $10,000 to $15,000 for hardware, and then it would probably take that much to get them in position. And I think we could use grad students, which are basically slave labor. They work for hamburgers. And then we could collect the data and see what we could find. And that would be a good pilot. We just have not spent any money yet, just beyond the actual feasibility study. But, we're talking about $150,000, maybe $180,000 to pull something like that off.
Right on. Yeah, that's not too bad.
That's doable. That's something that you could do on GoFundMe or Kickstarter or something like that. I just haven't put the project together yet. I've been working on the car company so hard, I just haven't looked up.
So, and that's got to be cheaper than if you and I just wanted to go out and hire a private pilot just to fly us over to get a good shot of the supposed hole. I mean, that would have to cost more than $150, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, it was too far too. In order to go that far, you'd have to take a jet. That's out of turboprop range. And the only jet that we spoke to was an old 727. It definitely could do it. He just wouldn't fly any lower than 17,000 feet, so we didn't do it.
Right on. So I have people who write me and they're like, hey, I really like the show, but you keep going on about this hollow earth thing, and I just don't buy it. And I've had people tell me that they've taken flights from one side of the globe to the other that has flown over the North Pole. And I mean, do flight paths go over there, or are they just so high above the clouds that you wouldn't see it anyway?
No, they don't go that high. I think the highest flights go up to about 76. I think it's 76 or 77 degrees, which is pretty high, but we're going to 86. That's way over the horizon from where you're flying those commercial jets. I've flown back from Korea, China, Japan, and I know what they're talking about, but they don't go that high up over the North Pole.
Right on. Now I got something to say to these people. So do you think that, I guess you have a pretty good idea of where the hole would be. Is it closer to the true north or the magnetic north, or do you have a particular longitude, latitude you expect to find it?
We have a particular latitude, and it's been digested by our team to be 86 degrees north. 143 east. And I, believe me, been to lots and lots of shipping companies and cruise companies and ice-rated hull companies. No one will go that far north except for Murmansk. Murmansk will go that far. There were 3 ships that could do it. I think they're down to 1. I think it's just a 50 Years of Glory that can do that high right now. The Yamal's been decommissioned. The Captain Kalibnikov, that one's been decommissioned. So only the 50 Years of Glory is left.
Wow.
But it's a big ship. It's 450 feet long, 73,000 tons. It's a big ship, and it can definitely do it. And I don't think it would get stuck in the Arctic. It has almost got stuck in the Antarctic a couple times, but not the Arctic.
Man, so I think people really do forget just how hard it is to get up there, even in 2015 with all the things we have. Because people have said things to me like, why can't we take a picture from space? Why doesn't a satellite get a picture? Why don't they see it from the International Space Station? What about Google Earth?
Google Earth is animated. Everything above 60 parallels animated. They don't actually get real imagery. In 2006, the Data Denial Act was a joint resolution that was passed by EUMETSAT and NOAA. They do not publish any real-time data above the 70th parallel.
Really?
Cannot do it, because that data could actually be used to feed into the imagery systems of cruise missiles. It could be used by enemies to use as navigation. So they do not release that information. That's why you don't see any photographs on the web. And you can search to your heart's content. You're not going to find any.
Wow. Now, I guess true as that might be, it is also very convenient if there are people who don't want us to know about that.
That's true. And, there's always the kind of woo-woo side to this. And that is when you incorporate the UFO side. And I would say, people say, well, do you believe in UFOs? I would respond by saying, you're not one of the ones that believe we're the only beings in the whole universe, are you?
Right.
So if there are advanced beings here, whether they're ultra-terrestrials or whether they are extraterrestrials, I think that there's enough witness data out there to back up the idea that, okay, there are at least a few dozen ships flying around. And one thing we know, Greg, they are as present as they want to be.
Yeah.
If they want to be more present, I doubt there's anything that could stop them from being more present. But be that as it may, they're not up in the air all the time. They're parked somewhere.
Right.
They got a base somewhere. Because you gotta empty the porta potty sometime.
Of course. I'm right there with you.
If you were gonna hide a civilization from another civilization, you would hide in a place that they don't go. And we know very little about our sea floor. I mean, we know our shipping lane's okay, but as far as the Arctic, it's a complete frontier. If there were ships underneath the sea, on the sea floor in the Arctic, or floating under the ice, we'd never know about it.
Right.
So if we put this ship in that place with that much exploratory consciousness, that far away from civilization, if they want to, they could show themselves to us and we would catch it on film. And that would change everything.
Right. Yeah, man. I think that's a really intriguing area. And, I grew up being interested in aliens and UFOs. And it wasn't until way late in the game that I started hearing people talking about, well, maybe they're not aliens at all. Maybe they're from a previous civilization that survived a previous cataclysm. They could have always been Earth-based, possibly. And it's kind of interesting because then I would think, well, why would you give the surface to humans? Why would you let us enjoy this beautiful surface? And it's like, well, it is a pretty harsh environment. I mean, we do have to make shelters just to kind of deal with it. And you could just use the Earth as a natural shelter and just know that cataclysms happen and it's best just to stay down there.
Well, you make a really good observation. A lot of people don't know this, but humans spend less than 15% of their time outside.
Yeah, not a lot.
Also, if you look at Earth and you compare it to, well, any other planet that we can see within 20,000 light years, this is the only one that you could really live on the surface. Mm-hmm. The others are kind of inhospitable. Either boiling or they're freezing or they have toxic gases or no atmosphere at all, like our moon or Mars, a very thin and cold one. It would make perfect sense that any civilization living on those planets would simply live inside the planet and go out only when necessary.
Yeah, I'm with you. I love that idea. I find it really compelling because I guess growing up and having the mainstream idea of aliens in my head, they just seem so far away. And then to go to the polar opposite of that with this idea, they're right there. They could be right there all the time. And there's actually something slightly more disconcerting about that. It makes it feel like maybe we're not even the apex creature on our own planet. And I just think that's a really interesting thought exercise to go through. And another interesting point about that is, even if they aren't from here, when we occupy a country like Iraq, we don't bring our troops back and forth every day. You know, we station them nearby. So why wouldn't beings from another galaxy perhaps do the exact same thing?
That's a good question. You know, relative to other animals with longer lifespans than we breed like rabbits. It doesn't take us very long to fill up all the available space.
Right.
A being that's been here that long, that's living in limited space, has learned either how to live a very long time or how to control their population. Mm-hmm. So we're probably not very well respected in that regard.
I also think it's kind of interesting when you look at the general ufology community. Two of the big memes that happen is it seems like these UFOs are disabling nuclear facilities, which is interesting. Why would they be that concerned unless they also inhabited this space, perhaps inside the Earth?
They're going after the weapons, not the power generation.
Right, right. And the weapons would be a threat if, you know, they also inhabited the same space.
Well, we've blown off over 2,600 of those things. So I guess we've pretty well trashed the space.
Well, that's true. The other meme that's popular is genetics, of course, you know, the abduction phenomenon and people having some type of genetic manipulation. And it kind of makes me think that if they were from Zeta Reticuli or the Orion Nebula, wouldn't they have, if they had the technology to get here, a pretty damn advanced genetics program? Because ours is actually pretty good and we're still stuck here. And also, why would their genetics be 100% compatible with ours? It just makes me think perhaps if they were surviving from a previous cataclysm down inside the Earth, there might be more reason to be doing that kind of genetic stuff.
Well, there's no doubt about it but I talk this over with my friends all the time. They say, well, what about, you know, hybrids? What about generating other possibilities between humans and someone else?
Yeah.
And I say, well, look, all that's possible. But then what spirit actually inhabits that body? I mean, it's not like a horse and a donkey having a mule. Mm-hmm. We're talking about something that's a good portion human, but then is it going to be sentient, intelligent, or is it going to be an ape or an animal? What spirit is going to inhabit that? It has to come through, you know, a human womb in order to access the human spirit. Mm-hmm. If it comes through an alien womb, who's going to be born in it? And what good would it do them to be in a body like ours?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's compelling stuff. I also think you can compare it to if you consider the Greys or aliens to be kind of a cultural overlay of a phenomenon that might have gone to, you know, might be way older than even we know. There's a lot of Irish lore about beings down below, elves, gnomes, leprechauns, and a lot of the stories of these things involve taking kids in the night and stuff like that. They involve being associated with royalty. And it's also funny that, you know, Great Britain and Ireland, these areas where these stories come from, they're islands. So if you did have some type of surface farm going or something that you were working with, you know, beings up there before we developed all this global travel, you would put them on an island. And so these stories are interesting, and they could be connected to the stories. We now call them the grays because we have a scientific mind instead of a fantasy mind, but they could be kind of the same phenomenon.
It very well could be. I think the grays, from what I can understand from the UFO community, they're more like a biological robot.
Yeah.
They just kind of follow orders and do a task and run a program. They can't really think things out.
Yeah, I do hear that too. And perhaps if they were just some worker bee for some other being, that other being who actually runs that might actually look a lot like us. And they kind of remain in the shadows. So all we really see is these weird, biological entity things.
Well, they're no match for, a person with a Glock. Worry about that too much. And they realize that too. They're frail compared to us. Mm-hmm. If they don't have some kind of mental lock on, but that's why they allegedly take us one at a time.
Yeah.
They'd have no way to protect themselves against a group of 100. They can't control 100 people.
Right. It is wild, and I do love speculating on that stuff, and it's really tough to get any kind of answers. But you hear the rumors and you hear the whispers, and there's something going on to some faction of the population. But in terms of the hollow earth, it's like a hollow cavity inside. That makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, I even think about what physics shows you. We're told we're in a spiraling galaxy with a black hole in the center. When you look at a tornado or a hurricane, they create a void in the center. So it seems like, nature shows me that when things are spinning very fast, like a planet does, and also you could look at geodes, the only round rocks we know, you break them open and there's sometimes a hollow cavity. It seems like we have a lot of examples that show that things that are spinning at a fast rate create a void. And that, that all makes sense to me. But then they get into the idea of an inner sun of some kind. And that is hard for me to wrap my mind around. Do you think there's any kind of light source down there?
Yeah. Actually, we watched two studies. One was done in Cambridge, and it was done in Japan. And the spectrographic data came back from their measurements that the core of the Earth was a single iron crystal. And that's quite possible. But they recorded the temperature at 5,000 degrees C. And that's where the theory fell apart, because the crystalline form of iron that they're talking about cannot exist at that temperature, not enough energy. So the experiment was duplicated at Cambridge with a U.S. lab helping them. They created a diamond anvil. This is a point at which they could apply so much hydraulic pressure that they could duplicate the pressures on the inside of the planet. They then could shoot a laser at it to get it to the right temperature. Once they reached 6,000 degrees C, the iron crystal was stable and it was putting off a beautiful white light. So that made sense. If we have an iron core and it's at 6,000 degrees C, which by the way is the temperature of the sun, then it puts off a white light. Now the difference between that light and the light we see from our sun is that this is an electron light. That is to say, it's made by electrons falling from upper orbitals in the molecule to lower ones. The light we see from the sun is from fusion. It is the energy released when you fuse two hydrogen protons together to make helium. And it puts out all kinds of frequencies which fluoresce with other things, namely our atmosphere, and it creates the diffuse light that we see. But it's also very harmful to us. The light put off by iron inside the crust would not be harmful. I'm not really sure how photosynthesis would work with that wavelength of light, but it would be visible and it would provide enough heat to sustain life inside the planet. The other difference is that our sun sits in a vacuum 93 million miles away from Earth. The core of Earth, if there is a void there, sits inside of an insulated pocket of atmosphere. There is no vacuum. So it'd be interesting to see how something that's 6,000 degrees C, that's say 1,200 miles away behind air, would be insulated from the surface. So it wouldn't cook the surface. It would be insulated from it. We only have about 5 or 6 miles of atmosphere above us.
So you don't think it would be too hot in there to support life?
No. I will say this. If there is a void there, I don't care what the temperature is, there will be life.
Yeah. Man, Brooks, this has been amazing.